Okay, so maybe we start here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zandile Ndhlovu. As discussed, I am a freediver and I'm South Africa's first Black female freediving instructor. And how I want to share a little bit about my journey, and I want to share about the importance of diverse representation and how race always interacts with the climate crisis that we're going through. So yeah, first things first, I am an instructor, like I said, and I run an incredible foundation called the Black Mermaid Foundation. Part of the passion that brings me to this place is when I was growing up, I didn't grow up anywhere near the ocean. I grew up in Soweto, a township that is about 6 hours from the ocean. And so there is a big disconnect from where I come from in relation to the ocean. And that is part of my work, and that is what we do. What does the foundation do? We work to create access to ocean spaces in hope to see more diverse representation, of course, but so that we also see that representation in careers, so that we see that representation recreationally, so that we see that we see that in sport. And the importance of that is because when you look at Black and Brown communities, ordinarily it's how we've always interacted with the ocean has always been in relation to sustenance. And so how do we change that relationship? How do we dream a better tomorrow for our communities? And so we work with kids that are between the ages of 10 to 15 years old, and we go on snorkel excursions. And for most of the kids, it's their first time seeing beneath the surface of the water. So it's such an incredible experience which is something that we're going to go back to. Why are we afraid of the water? There's a big fear in the community that I come from, which is a Black community. And so we're always doing the work that says, how did we get here? How do we build that connection? But also, how do we create futures that we hope for? This would be us out on an excursion. The kids kit up, the kids learn and they get comfortable, and then we go out to sea. And so again, what do I want to talk about today? How did we get here? Why does diverse representation matter? What are the barriers to entry, and what can we do? So how did we get here? So there's two aspects of this, right? There's the historical aspect. So in South Africa, we had a horrible history. We come from a horrible history of apartheid. And so when you look at the ocean space, it was never a safe space. People were first dispossessed of their ocean-facing homes. That was the first aspect. But people found on good beaches, the beaches where people weren't drowning as much, they could be jailed for it, right? Because those were called white beaches. And so there's the historical aspect when you look at that from South Africa, but we could also look at the slave trade. But second to this is how we grow up. We grow up with stories that tell us that we shouldn't be anywhere near water. We're told about snakes that live in the water. We're told about things that create fear when it comes to the ocean space. And so we immediately begin to hold a narrative that is not a helpful narrative. And the narrative says Black people aren't water people. And my work has always been to change that narrative, but to also expand it, because that narrative is incomplete. You know, when you think of Black people being water people, Black people not being water people, that's completely linked to history. And so how do we complete that narrative, but importantly, expand it? And so why does diverse representation matter? Why do we need everybody in the water? For me, one of the biggest and most important things is when you think of climate change, the communities that will be most affected by climate change are Black and Brown communities, the global majority. And so how do we find ourselves in a position that is able to not only learn about the ocean, but see what we can do to mitigate some of the challenges that the ocean is facing? And so diverse representation says, in order for us to see a better future for our oceans, we need to be doing this work together. How do we hold this work together? Whether we're talking about plastic pollution, whether we're talking about, rising ocean temperatures, what can we do that protects us for the future, but that also allows us to keep healthy oceans for the generations to come? And so diverse representation brings us to the question that says, what can we do? And so what are the barriers to entry? There's 4 key things that I always look at when it comes to barriers to entry. 1, it's the question of access. Proximity doesn't equate to access. And so you find there's lots of communities that live close to the ocean, but they don't have access. And so how do we help bridge that gap? We get to the second part that says resources. To bridge that gap is to provide resources that enable people to be able to access the ocean. Here in Cape Town, we talk to gear, we talk to having capacity where people are actually able to swim. And so it's access, capacity, skill, and resources. And so that is the work that we focus on. We focus on creating that access so that the kids are able to get into the water. We provide the resources that allows the kids to have the gear to be able to explore. We provide capacity, knowing that most of the time, parents are unable to create that world for their kids. And so what does it mean to be able to provide that capacity while providing skill? Skill being the last part. We find that because most parents are unable to swim, that is also one of the key contributors to why the ocean becomes inaccessible. And so how do we provide that skill? And why do we need to do this work? It brings us back to, I think there's an importance in correcting historical injustices. And so it's the mixture of just making sure that we expand the narrative that allows people to be able to feel connected to the ocean. And I think that's a key part of my work. And in talking to representation, I want to share about some of the things that I've been able to do as a part of my journey in the ocean space that allows for expansion and dreams. I've moved into film, the space that says, and the space that gives people the possibility to dream differently, right? We did a show with Discovery last year called Shark Woman, where 3 women went out looking for great white sharks, and I was the underwater cinematographer with the girls looking for, the sharks. And it was such an incredible world because the feedback that we got from across the world was, we've never seen a Black woman underwater looking for sharks on Shark Week. This massive, massive platform that allowed us to expand the representation, that allowed us to put the discussion on the table anew that says, who is a water person and how can we all attach to the possibility? I then went on to write a film called The Black Mermaid, and it is currently streaming on Waterbear. Again, this was the space that says, what does it mean when we begin owning our own narratives, when we start writing our own stories, when we start telling our own stories, what happens then? And that's always an incredible place because our stories have always been told for us. And The Black Mermaid is a story that talks to the stories that we grow up with. It talks about the possibility of dreaming despite where we come from. But most importantly, it opens up the invitation. It says the ocean is open and the ocean is for everyone. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that is currently happening, the space of becoming a director and writing my own stories. In addition to that, representation was, I don't know why I'm, excuse me. In addition to working on representation was to write a children's book. This children's book is out in the world. And one of the things that, again, often poses a challenge when it comes to the ocean space is language. And so this book is available in South Africa, but it's available in 5 languages, something that doesn't often happen. It allows people to be able to connect in their mother tongue with these ocean stories. And I think this is key when we're talking to how we diversify the ocean, how we diversify the stories that we hold in our bodies, and how we expand possibility and how we expand dreams. The book has done incredibly well. And I think that's easily one of the biggest discussions that come to mind when we say, how do we shape and create the futures that we hope for? And so the last question for me then said, what can we do? How do we create this world that we're dreaming of? How do we make it happen? And so one, we need to create that representation, which is what we're already doing. But two, how do we capacitate communities? How do we help communities to be able to dream bigger? But also, when we're doing conservation work, what does it mean when we don't follow Western normatives? And for me, this is important as an African, as a Black woman living in Africa. You know, I had to open up my conservation work I do my conservation work through creating access to ocean spaces. But I also realized that we have different challenges in Africa, right? You cannot ask people to care for the ocean when people do not have dinner on their tables at night, when people are still have a challenge of active survival. So how I look at conservation, it said, how do we find a way to bring value to the ocean-facing communities in order for them to also have a dignified existence in how they integrate and how they live with the ocean. If we're able to provide a means of value, then it brings us back to the space that says, then the ocean can be protected. It allows us to think past the immediate challenges that we're facing. And so this was a really important thing. And this is a challenge that I love to put out into the world that says, how do we dream differently? How do we work to dignify people's lives while we say we need to protect our oceans? And it's such a beautiful story of just reimagining the worlds that we could go to if we started doing this work together. 3, collaboration, partnerships and collaboration. Again, a challenge that we often face in the continent is helicopter projects. So people come from around the world and they tell people what to do with their oceans. And we focus on creating partnerships and collaborations because when we partner, we are able to co-create something that becomes of value to the community. And if it belongs to the community, then the community changes how they live with the water, but also there's a level of ownership there. And that ownership is what we are always seeking. And last is, again, then expanding into the question that says people protect things that they feel belong to them. It allows space for people to really be stakeholders in what happens in the oceans. And as they become stakeholders, they become key decision makers and protect the oceans for the generations to come. And so I always say there's no thriving humanity without healthy oceans. Does anyone have any questions so far? Anything that you'd like me to expand on? All right, with that, oh, should I check the chat?
I'll let you know, Zandy, if anything comes up in the chat. I think the main thing people were saying about buying the book and whether or not it was available in the UK or whether or not it was only over in South Africa.
Oh, thank you for that. The book has actually, Amazon has bought the global distribution of the English version of the book, and so it's going to be available worldwide. At the moment, it's only available at the bookshops in South Africa, but you can actually get your hands on it if you'd love to. And I think it's such a beautiful story because it just explores, again, everything that I talk about. It explores history, it explores the dreams that we can have when we begin to expand the narratives that we grow up with. And having Amazon buy the global distribution of the book has been so incredible because it really allows us to expand the stream globally. And I think maybe, yeah.
I continue. Yeah, no, keep going. I was just going to say there's another question as well from Filzana. So when you're ready, I'll let you have that one as well.
Bring the question.
It was, how difficult is it for children to get access to equipment?
It's actually this is a very big challenge because parents just don't have that kind of money. And so you're always kind of holding you're holding two challenges, the space of saying, this could be accessible, but it isn't. So through our foundation, we provide kids with the mask, the snorkel, the fins, the wetsuit. We provide the kids with all of that so that they are able to explore. But no one owns their own gear because that gear is quite expensive, and it is expensive to rent as well.
Okay, and there was another question, something that I'm also very interested in as well. What shark have you enjoyed diving with the most?
It's actually interesting because when I was preparing this talk, I normally talk a lot about, you know, a little bit of everything, but I wanted to focus on this. I've had the incredible I've had the incredible opportunity to dive with quite a few sharks, including a massive great white shark. Probably the first time that I was really, really scared in the water, but I've also had really beautiful shark encounters, from bull sharks to tiger sharks to, what other sharks are there? Ooh, okay, bronze sharks we already know, but my most memorable dive has to have been with great white sharks, just because they are really massive. You think they're massive until they like turn and face you and you freak out. And maybe while we're here, I'd actually love to share. Now I'm like, I should have not changed this presentation, because I have these videos that I like to play, just because it's such a different world. But I've had such incredible encounters in the ocean, and one of my top three experiences, which I talk about, including the great white shark one, was seeing a humpback whale baby and mom in the water. And because the little humpback whale, the fluke doesn't work yet. And so you're watching this massive whale and this baby whale, and it's learning to like kick up its tail. And it's really, really powerful. And yeah, and probably my third and best experience is just diving with dolphins and just witnessing how intelligent they are, and witnessing how they hear us and they respond to us. And it's really incredible to be in the ocean and witness wildlife in the wild.
Thanks, Sandy. Just a couple more questions that have just popped up. Tony was asking about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how scary or dangerous is ocean diving?
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being less scary, the ocean, I would say 1, right? It sounds incredibly daunting, but it's still one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I love the ocean. I live there. I live for it. And ocean diving is probably some of the most incredible diving you'll ever do. Like, you get to witness incredible marine life, but also you get to see the challenges of human spaces with the ocean. So when we're diving, we're always finding plastic in the water, and you're like stuffing it in your wetsuit, you're coming out of the water with it, but you just realize how we as humans are not managing to keep ours out of the ocean. But it's an incredible experience, and an experience that I love a lot.
And Samantha asks, do you talk to children and young people about the range of environmental or conservation careers?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. This is easily one of my most favorite things. When the kids come in, every single group that comes in from the foundation, and when I'm talking in schools, I always say, we often focus on like one kind of intelligence, but a lot of people don't know that you can do underwater welding. You don't know that you can become, you can become a marine biologist, but also with some of the things that my kids don't know is that when they're watching a Shark Week show and they see a shark on the screen, they don't know that there's someone holding the camera behind that. And so just becoming an underwater cinematographer, there's so many worlds that open up once you embrace the ocean space. You can become a skipper, you can become a dive master, traveling the world, teaching the world to dive. There's just so many opportunities that we don't get to know because you just don't know what you don't know. And I think that's easily been one of the most incredible parts of the work, teaching about the possibilities in the ocean.
And Fauzana asks, what challenges have you faced or would you like to share about inclusion?
The challenges that I've faced are 3. So, well, top of mind are 3. So when when I started diving, I was always the only Black person on the boat who was a guest. And all that means is that there's always been a normative, and you come in and all of a sudden the jokes that would be funny in a undiverse space aren't funny because there's a Black person on the boat. And so I had a challenge with my hair. So people would always say, are you going to dive with all of that hair? And I would say, what does that even mean? You're already the only, it's just challenges of just feeling excluded and always being reminded that you're the different one. Whether it was my hair, whether it was my wetsuit. If you ever see me diving, I have a Black woman's body. I have hips, I've got a smaller waist, but all that meant was the wetsuits never fit. And so they fit your bottom half, and it's just like gaping water while you're diving in the beginning. And I think that's, again, one of those challenges that you don't know how to deal with, because just suits weren't made as inclusive as they could be. And then there was the challenge of language. In South Africa, again, you know, we just have our own challenges. And so you always have to say, can we speak English? Can we speak English? Can we speak English? And people are offering to translate to you, and you're saying, no, I'd actually just like to learn in English, if that's fine by everyone. So for me, those were the challenges. And in the foundation, I would say it would again be the push that says, why do you only focus on the Black and brown community? Why do why don't you focus on everybody? And so it's always just saying, well, my challenge is where I come from. And so I can only work on this work from the perspective that I come from, and that's my chosen work. And aside from that, it's the finances. We've always been self-funded, and we've only just started getting funding, and that's also incredible, but it's also a challenge, because often when companies give you money, they also want you to hold their dream bigger than your dream. So for me, I think that's been a big challenge, just a reminder to be in truth and to speak truth and to hold on to the dream, because the dream's never for sale.
I'm muted. I always forget that I've muted myself. Just a couple more questions on the chat. I've got a special interest in great white shark conservation. Is there any way to get involved with conservation in South Africa?
Absolutely, yes. There's an incredible company called Marine Dynamics. They do really beautiful work. They do white shark research, but they also do seabird conservation. So if you look up Marine Dynamics, you should be able to see a little bit of their work and see how you can support their work with white shark research.
Okay, and then just the last one. You mentioned plastics and polluting materials that you find in the depths. Do you infuse these conservation concerns in your training as a means of making your students aware of the dangers?
Absolutely, yes. I always say kids don't always listen to what we say, but they do what we do. And so I have a lead student in my group, and every single time we're in the water and I'm grabbing the plastic and I'm putting it in my wetsuit and I'm putting the bigger items in our buoy, what has been interesting is watching my lead student. He will just leave the buoy, swims off, comes back with plastic, and he's just putting it in the buoy. But before we go into the sea, our work is this. We introduce ourselves, we talk about what we're going to find in the sea, we talk about the challenges that the ocean is facing and what the kids can do. We educate on the 12 items that we find the most in the sea and how we keep track of that. So we definitely are always working to ensure that we include a lot of conservation work, because the kids are, they're the future business leaders. They're the future citizens that are going to protect our oceans. And so every single chance we get, we always have a responsibility to just educate as best we can. And then it's incredible to see them do it.
Great, thank you. One more question just popped in. Have you noticed changes in diversity over your career in Access? Is it moving in a positive direction?
That's a The answer is yes. It's definitely moving in a positive direction. When I think of when I started diving to today, it's really incredible to be able to see the amount of diverse representation there is in the ocean space. And it's still slow though, right? It's still hard and it's still slow, but it's moving. And I think when I look at my kids in the foundation, they are the reminder that we are expanding. I think it's just a question that says, what follows this? How are we able to provide more support so that the kids can stay in the ocean space? Because there is a cost that's affected, that's a part of it. Like, you know, yes, we've gone snorkeling. Yes, we've learned to swim. Yes, how do we help that move through and have a longer time frame? We haven't figured that question out yet, that answer yet.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. And I think, you know, when I think about, maybe to share a little bit of my story, because I didn't really fully expand on it. I found the ocean when I was 28 years old. I was 28 years old when I first went snorkeling for the first time. And this lady on the boat holds up the snorkel, holds up the mask, and she says, and the reason she actually noticed is because the captain says, everybody kit up. I didn't know what that meant. So I'm looking around in the boat and I'm kind of watching what everybody's doing. And this lady says, have you ever been snorkeling before? And I say, no. And she says, why didn't you say anything? And I was like, I would have figured it out. To be honest, I would have not figured it out. We would not be here if that lady did not happen. And she held up the snorkel and she held up the mask and she says, you breathe in and out through this one and the mask is going to close your face. You won't be able to breathe through your nose. And that moment was a life changer for me. I was 28 years old and did not know how to use a snorkel set. And that kind of tells you that you just don't know what you don't know. And from that moment, when I jumped into the water, there was fear. And so part of my lessons from the sea is the reminder that it's never too late to start. You know, everyone that is around me has been, you know, they got their certifications when they were 13. They've been swimming in the sea since they were 5, which is fantastic. But for me, it's still a very new space and it's incredible to still be able to experience it. And freediving, particularly for me, has brought the second learning, the learning to be present. You're holding this one breath and you're going to the bottom of the ocean, 35 meters deep. You know, scuba, you have the option to breathe in and out. On freedive, that whole breath is in your lungs and that whole dive is in your lungs. And it really changes the currency of life because you learn to be a different kind of present person. And that fear is not the only emotion that there is. You know, my journey to becoming a freediving instructor and later becoming South Africa's first Black female freediving instructor was the realization that the deeper I went, I was afraid. I was afraid because of all the stories that you grow up with. And so it's the work of addressing your fears, seeing your fears and being with your fears. It really has been the most incredible learning for me.
Okay,
And that's us.
Yeah, a couple more questions that have popped up on the chat. What type of partnerships do you think could be the most transformative to your foundation?
I think it's, so at the moment we're working on placing ocean hubs in townships, which is something that has never been heard of. So it's like this ocean inspired space in a township. For me, those are the partnerships that will matter the most, because now we've got this shipping container that lives in the community. If we start dreaming about the ocean and with the ocean, even right where we are, we begin to open up opportunities. We begin to open up the space of dreaming differently. So for me, it's partnerships that say, hey, we have a shipping container. Can we drop it off? Where's the next place you want to open up? But it's just the continuous space of creating a safe space in the community where the community holds with you in that dream. And now that we're learning to swim, which is really amazing, it's opening up new opportunities because it makes the kids able to expand their own skills. And I don't know if you know, but South Africa's third highest cause of incidental death is drowning in South Africa. So to be able to hold on to that and better that as well is really powerful, and it changes the community. I'm a big believer in making the work exist in the community, because communities create change together.
Well, a couple more questions. It says, interestingly, PADI, the Global Diving Qualifying Centre, collects data on age and gender of divers, but not ethnicity. They also have a Women's Day. Do you think divers should help lobby PADI to collate data on ethnicity and also have a Black and Brown Divers Day?
I think, PADI is doing such incredible work to expand diversity, right? I think PADI was the first, like instructional book that I saw that actually had Black people in it. No one else across the entire dive industry has that. And so I definitely think that they should be collecting data on how many divers are in the different ethnicities that are diving, because it tells us if we're actually expanding and if the representation is growing in the diving space. The PADI Women's Dive Day is beautiful to have, but I don't know if we need to have Black and Brown Diving Day. I think, as long as we are working to expand diversity in our own ways, and PADI keeps showing that representation through their reading materials, through their social media, through the various platforms that they work through, I think that's powerful. They didn't have that they didn't have that in their social media so much. Now they do, and it matters.
Okay, and just one more question. It's about swimming with great whites. How long did it take for you to free dive with big sharks? And when you see a shark and want to get out of the ocean, is that the scariest part of diving?
So what was the first question again?
How long did it take for you to free dive with big sharks?
It didn't take me very long, maybe a year, because I focused a lot on depth in the beginning, but I don't know why, but I've always felt weirdly comfortable around sharks. And last week I was at this thing called the Sardine Run. The Sardine Run has all the sharks of the world show up and everyone's chasing sardines. But the sharks in Port St. John's are slightly different. They're a little bit wilder. We don't know what it is. But anytime when you are one person in the water, you just start seeing these sharks coming up, and you have to protect yourself. But it's a funny thing, because every single time I've had that encounter, I just dive back down. Like, as the shark's coming up, I immediately dive down towards it. And I talk about this all the time. Sharks do eye contact. Eye contact is important with sharks. It reminds them that you are not food, but also when you run, you behave like prey. And so you never run from a shark. You turn and face, or you dive in.
Good. Thanks. I think that is all of the questions that are on the chat at the moment.
Thank you so very much. I think that's all I had for us today, but I'm happy to share a little bit more about the foundation, share a bit more about the work in case anyone is wanting to support us in any way. But we are blackmermaid.co.za, that's our website. And on social media, we are at the Black Mermaid Foundation.